NATO and EU ministers discuss Russian-Ukraine war, backing off peace or publicly supporting Ukraine. The NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg addressed the EU Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels today, November 14, 2023. The primary topic was Russian aggression and specifically the Ukraine war. It has been almost 2 weeks since it was leaked that the Europeans and the U.S. were discussing what needed to be done to bring a negotiated end to the war, as it appears to be in a stalemate. Since then, there has been public statements to continue to support Ukraine, but there has also been some movement on outlining what could be done to bring a negotiated settlement to the war. Today, the meeting seemed to be a setback for the prospect of peace, but was this a true setback, or was this NATO and EU communicating to the Russians that the West still has resolve to continue supporting Ukraine to see the war through to a conclusion? The first statement on the subject was a hardline stance from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz over the weekend. He stated that Germany will double its aid to Ukraine and that negotiations with Russia cannot start until the Russians withdraw from Ukraine territory. Not until the withdrawal happens will negotiations be able to start. Though Scholz did not support the Zelensky 10-point peace plan, the requirement of Russian troop withdrawal is at the heart of Zelensky's plan. Scholz is backing his position up with more military aid and is giving Ukraine unequivocal German support. This appears to put an obstacle to peace since Russian withdrawal is not likely, and with the stalemate on the battlefield, it is not likely that Ukraine can dislodge the Russians. Today, Stoltenberg told the EU ministers that the Ukraine's decision on when and if to start negotiations with the Russians, and until a decision is made, Europe must continue to support Ukraine. With military aid, it needs to stay strong on the battlefield. He also stated that Ukraine is at the heart of NATO's strategy in Europe. This is again a position that Ukraine's battlefield strength gives it the best chance for lasting peace and security. The U.S. State Department has also denied the U.S. is trying to push Ukraine to start peace talks with the Russians. The State Department stated that any negotiations with the Russians is up to the Ukrainians, and their 10-point plan is the only formula for peace that has been discussed. This means that the EU, NATO, and the U.S. are publicly supporting Ukraine and stated that continued aid is required to keep Ukraine in the war. All these statements from Ukraine's partners supporting Zelensky's 10-point plan and continued pledges of military support seem to indicate that they are backing away from the idea of peace talks. However, things may not appear as they seem. The Russians, despite the West leaking and negotiating an end to the war, so far have not appeared to make any movements towards negotiating, but also have left the door open outside of rejecting Zelensky's non-serious plan. The Russians recently restocked with ammunition needed for static warfare and still holding a battlefield edge, so they may be waiting to see if there are cracks in Western support for Ukraine that can be exploited. This would give Russia an edge in negotiating more favorable terms. The statements by Stoltenberg and the Germans promised to double military aid to Ukraine may not be the West giving up on peace talks, but a tacit tactic to show continued Western resolve. If Russia does not come to the negotiating table, the West is willing to provide the support to exact a price from the Russians. The fact that the Russians have not outright rejected the idea of peace talks seems like a good sign. The West is making the right negotiating move to show resolve, rally around Ukraine, and offer its support because they know that Ukraine must be strong on the battlefield if peace can be negotiated and not have terms forced on them by the Russians. Time will tell if this is just part of a chess move or the acceptance that peace is not possible at this time. The West knows demographic challenges of Ukraine that increased military aid cannot fully compensate for, so it seems like this is a part of a chess game. We will all find out soon enough, but until then, we can only watch and wait.